This episode of the Chris Johnston Show is brought to you by Sports Interaction. Sports Interaction is your homegrown sports book where local takes on an entirely different meaning, focusing on the teams, games, and players that matter to you. Sports Interaction is on the ground, on top of all the local trends, and offering prop bets that you'd never even imagined existed, from same-game parlays to a best-in-class casino featuring thousands of games and live 24/7 dealers. And now introducing the Locker Room, the first of its kind in Canada, a live watch party for the biggest games of the week. Sports Interaction, your homegrown sportsbook. Go to sportsinteraction.com/SDPN to open an account. Bet local. 19 plus. Please play responsibly. And if you have questions or concerns about gambling or the gambling of someone close to you, please go to connexontario.ca.
I know that some in our audience know the finer points of hockey.
The Chris Johnston Show.
We are your friends.
The biggest stories, bringing you inside the game.
What did you hear? Powered by Sports Interaction, your homegrown sportsbook. Always remember to bet local.
Here's Chris with your host, Julian McKenzie.
Part of the game.
On today's show, we'll get to Patrick Kane signing with the Detroit Red Wings, the big trade board put up by Big Money CJ. We're going to get to all of the players on that and the fact that the top is very stacked with Calgary Flames players. But first, let's get to Corey Perry. The situation as it is right now, Corey Perry, his contract terminated. A press conference earlier this week, much talked about with Kyle Davidson, the Blackhawks GM, addressing Corey Perry and the unfortunate rumor that circulated as a result of all the speculation that came from last week's events. There's a lot to get to with Corey Perry. I would love to know your thoughts on where we're at right now with him no longer being on a team and the press conference as well, and anything else in terms of analysis you feel is relevant to bring up with the story, because there's a lot to unpack.
Well, it's pretty clear the situation put a pretty big strain on the organization, on Kyle Davidson himself personally. I mean, it was, he grew pretty emotional during that press conference, Julian, kind of blaming himself, I think, on some level. I mean, he was the one who brought in Corey Perry. A lot of talk, about him mentoring, a young team, and Connor Bedard specifically. And obviously, something's transpired here that crossed the line to the point where, you're now talking about a player that has probably a borderline Hall of Fame case, perhaps ending his career this way. I mean, we'll have to see if someone signs him, but I think the feeling inside the Blackhawks organization naturally is that they have to be above repute, given the, where they've been. It's a completely new management team in Chicago. Obviously, none of the players that were around, back in the era of the Kyle Beach situation are there. Stan Bowman lost his job. Joel Quenneville lost his job. He'd moved on to Florida. We know the fallout from that, but even in the wake of that, and many years later, I think the Blackhawks obviously are very sensitive to employee conduct and how everyone goes about their business. So, pretty stunning turn of events, I guess, for those on the outside, right? I mean, this all kind of unraveled quickly, from where Corey Perry took a morning skate before a game in Columbus last Wednesday. Didn't play in that game. That was, when the organization, first learned, or at least Kyle Davidson learned of, what happened with Perry, and then they conducted their investigation. And, now I guess from the business end of it, Perry does have an option for 60 days here to grieve the decision to terminate his contract. But, even in that case, he would just be doing it to get the money back potentially versus, it's not as though he's going to have to be reinstated on Chicago's roster. So yeah, it's a tough one. And it's a tough one to talk about too, of course, because we don't have full view into what went on here either.
Well, that's the next question I was going to bring up, because I know people are going to wonder about it. We know in the statement from the team, I'll read part of it here. The Chicago Blackhawks have determined that Corey Perry has engaged in conduct that is unacceptable and in violation of both the terms of his standard player's contract and the Blackhawks' internal policies intended to promote professional and safe work environments. And Kyle Davidson was straight up asked if there was any criminality to what had happened, and he just said it was just a workplace matter. How likely is it that we're ever going to figure out what Corey Perry did to be put in this situation?
I'd say it's unlikely we'll know the full extent of it ever. because I don't see a lot of reason. I mean, now kind of what's done is done. I mean, it doesn't sound like it's, as you say, it's not a criminal act. So it's not something, at least the expectation from where I sit is that he's not going to be arrested or anything. So it's not anything that'll kind of go into the public record that way. You know, obviously the Blackhawks are moving on. I mean, they've terminated his contract. They're playing games now. You know, they made a trade for Anthony Beauvillier to, you know, try to bolster their forward group a little bit. And so that they're moving on. And I imagine, I guess it would only be if Corey Perry felt the need to say something and address it at some point in time. And, you know, I don't have a lot of insight into, you know, where he's at, if he could play again. I mean, remember his agent, Pat Morris, over the weekend released a statement saying that he had stepped away from the team to deal with a family matter, or personal matter, I believe that they called it. So, you know, I'm not sure where he's at. So the truth is I don't think we will know. You know, it was not by coincidence. I don't suspect that Kyle Davidson did brand it, though, a workplace matter. And, you know, really what this did is clearly violated, you know, the Blackhawks code of conduct, if you want to call it, you know, the rules by which, if you work for that organization, that everyone has to adhere to. And, you know, that's the foundation essentially for terminating his standard player contract that the team went ahead and did. So, you know, if you look back over history, there's been a number of contracts that have been terminated. You know, everyone from Slava Voinov, Mike Richards back in the day, obviously Evander Kane more recently here in San Jose. I mean, in Kane's case, he did end up going on having a career, but in large part, when you've seen this happen, usually it's the end of the road for a player, because it's obviously pretty serious to get to a situation where, you know, your contract can be terminated.
How do you feel about how Chicago handled this entire situation from a PR standpoint? There's only so much we can say internally, but just from how they first brought up the situation, how they may have handled the rumor about Corey Perry. What are your thoughts on how Chicago handled this situation?
Well, I'm somewhat more sympathetic to them than I think the average person might be. I think sometimes when you're in the middle of something like this, it can be, I mean, first of all, they're dealing with the situation, right? Like the most important thing truly is is how they handle it. And by all accounts, I mean, it's hard to criticize. They learned of an incident that took place. You know, they immediately removed Corey Perry from the team. They obviously did their investigation, and within days, you know, his contract's been terminated. So, I mean, it does appear, again, with our limited knowledge of what occurred, that they took it very seriously and handled that well. You know, I think managing the message could have been done a little bit better. And I'm sure that when they kind of go through their debrief, you know, Kyle Davidson was saying he feels like he wears it, that there's, you know, this awful rumor brings on life and, you know, obviously puts a lot of strain, I'm sure, on Connor Bedard and his family, given the nature of what was being said in some places. And, you know, I think maybe they could have been a little more proactive right from the beginning and said that, you know, Perry, like, I think they should have said more, because to me, it was the vacuum of information. That's what it got filled with other crap. And to be fair, there's like one main rumor, of course, and to the point that Kyle Davidson addressed it by saying, you know, that whatever happened didn't involve any of the players on the team or members of their family. But there were lots of other rumors too, because there was so little information swirling about out there. And I think that made it, you know, it took it to another level. Like, I'll tell you, I was taking the subway the other day in Toronto, and literally someone walked up to me who I don't know. And he's just like, "Did Corey Perry do it?" And I don't even know what
That's
do it.
Insane.
But like, it felt like it. I mean, obviously people do ask me stuff on the street sometimes, who the Leafs trading for or whatever. But like it sort of like reached a level of general consciousness. I don't think it would have, if maybe they could have been more forthright. I mean, hindsight is 2020, right? Maybe they could have come out and said right away that he's dealing with a personal issue. But then, you know, the counterpoint to that, because if they had said that on the first day, I don't think people would have dug into it as much, right? I mean, you would have been like, okay, I hope everything's okay there. But then, you know, people might have suggested when they found out that he later gets his contract terminated, well, they were burying it at the start, right? Like I think it is kind of a lose-lose, because what they said is organizational decision right from the beginning, right? He's not with the team for the foreseeable future. Organizational decision. Like, they were making it clear without saying what he did, that this was their call, that they were on top of it, that they were weighing punishment, I think was implied. And then everyone was going to say, well, what would he be punished for? He just played this game here. And so I think it was a really tough spot for them. And I honestly think they handled it about as well as they could. I just think it's unfortunate that, I don't know what the lesson is here, because you can't come out and say on the first day, well, he did this thing, because they don't know, right? Like, they actually have to go through a process to figure out what happened and, probably talk to multiple parties and all that and weigh the information. And it's the middle of the season. Like, everyone, all the reporters that cover the team every day saw him take the morning skate in Columbus, and then all of a sudden he's a mystery scratch. I mean, the circumstances really were unfortunate, but I guess the truth is I think the more truth you can tell, the better. I'll give you another quick example. It's not a parallel in terms of what's going on, but I feel like there's a lot of conspiracy theories out there around John Klingberg with the Maple Leafs. And part of that, I think, as I reflect on it, is that, they didn't talk about his injury situation in the lead up to when he went away too much. Like, just all of a sudden he's gone. Right. But the more I've learned of that, I mean, he has been dealing with a hip issue for some time. He got injured in a game on October 19th. He's been trying to play through this injury, gamely, and it's not going well. And so then everyone's like, well, he's struggling and now they're making him disappear. It's like, no, it's just people didn't have the information all along. And so I think then people jump to conclusions, I guess. A lot of people do. And so I think the more honest you can be, the better, and as quickly as possible, because in a lot of these situations, there's nothing to hide. I mean, the only thing to hide in the Perry situation is to protect, anyone else that was involved in the situation that let his contract, be terminated. But they didn't have anything else to hide. They removed him from the team. They did their investigation. They terminated his contract. Anyway, it's unfortunate. And I don't know why these rumors start, where they start, but unfortunately, in the way information can move around these days, I think to some degree it's a little bit unavoidable.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack from that. I think a lot of
Sorry,
good
that was a
points
long
made.
answer, but I mean, my
No,
brain's
that's fine.
going in every direction.
Totally understand. My thinking is, like, the particular rumor that we are discussing here, this is something that, like, I'm sure you had heard about for days. People on the ground in Chicago had heard about for days. The fact that it had gotten to a point where media people heard about it, like, it's not by accident that Chicago had to go out there and say, hey, this is not true. And the fact that it got to a point where it surfaced online and people ran with it, I consider that a failure on Chicago for not stopping that rumor a lot sooner. The fact that it got to a point where it was only this week where we saw some media outlets say that it was not true, and then other ones followed, and then Kyle Davidson has the press conference and says, okay, this is not true. I think they're way late in that process, first off. Two, I don't know if this is incorrect or correct or not. I'm just remembering from when we did the Athletic Hockey Show earlier this week and we had Mark Lazarus on, my understanding is that I don't think there were any reporters who were there on that Columbus trip because it was so close to Thanksgiving, which makes this so interesting. Yeah, that makes this fascinating for me, because if there was a reporter around, I'm curious if the situation had happened out there in the open for someone to see. My understanding is, and if it turns out I'm wrong, but you can go back to the Monday edition of that show when we had Mark Lazarus on. I believe he did say that there were no reporters who traveled on that specific part of the trip. So it doesn't seem as if, like, there was any reporter who would have been able to ask immediately, like, what's going on. It was a very strange situation from the get with that. I just going off of what we remember from the Monday show, but this was just such a strange situation, which only
right. So that's the Wednesday, and then it's Thursday's Thanksgiving, and then they're playing a Friday afternoon game at home against the Leafs on Black Friday, and he's not playing again, and so it's picking up steam, I guess. Maybe the weekend is when there was a chance, right? Kyle Davidson did meet reporters in Chicago on the weekend and really didn't say very much. Maybe there he could have said this is a workplace matter, something that would have deflected it away. But
the last thing I'll say about that too is just, we can't forget about the fact that this is Chicago being implicated in all of this. If this is another organization that doesn't have the history with dealing with very serious situations, we probably look at this team and judge them very differently for how they handle this situation. I don't know if those same rumors spread, but the fact that it is Chicago and they have so much work to do to basically replace their image, which has been tarnished by this Kyle Beach situation, I think that plays into the criticism that's being thrown their way, and it is justly deserved on that part. There's a lot to unpack from that, but I wanted those points to be made.
And it was a preposterous rumor, though. Be better, people.
It was absolutely
Come on.
preposterous rumor. It was.
But let's move
But
on. I don't want to give it any more life, but it was ridiculous.
We don't have to do that. Yeah, I guess that's as much as we can cover on this particular situation. We do have a lot to get to on the CJ show, so we'll get to sports interaction, and then we'll talk about your first trade board of the season. A lot to get to with that here on the CJ show.
It's all part of the game. Yeah, I just gotta go hard.
Welcome to You Can Bet That. Remember to hit up sportsinteraction.com/SDPN for all of your gaming needs. Patrick Kane joins the Detroit Red Wings. We already have on the Sports Interaction website total points by Patrick Kane in the 2023-2024 regular season. The line is set at 35.5 over under. Either way, odds are at 1.87 to 1. What do you got, Siege?
Well, look, he's going to return next week. Probably gives him an opportunity to play not quite 60 games, but high 50s. And if you look at his career scoring averages, even last season when he was playing on one leg, he scored at a rate that would put him probably above that line. So, I mean, the big mystery box we're all trying to navigate here is how healthy will he be? How close to his former self will he be on the other side of a pretty significant hip surgery? And we don't have that answer, but I would be inclined to look at the over here. I think it's going to go well. The Red Wings have something good going on there. He's got a great history with DeBrincat, and obviously there's other top offensive players in that Detroit lineup. He's going to get power play minutes. I like his odds to make an impact on that team. I mean, we're talking about probably the best U.S. born player in NHL history, and so I'm an optimist. I think it's gonna go well for Patrick and the Red Wings,
Especially if he gets time with Alex DeBrincat, right?
Yeah, I mean what's the number? They were together on a ridiculous number of goals in their time in Chicago. I mean they really understood each other. It was like him and Panarin back in the day when had a great run with the Blackhawks. But I think that Patrick Kane sees the ice a certain way and is such a great playmaker. Even if his mobility is not where it could be, I still think he's going to be an offensive force in Detroit.
Okay. Sportsinteraction.com/SDPN for all the best odds before game, in game, and the best props. Sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. CJ, you wasted no time in putting together your first trade board of the NHL season. It's very packed on the Athletic website.
Yeah, it's a heavy lift out of the gate. I mean, there's a number of factors for that. First of all, the trade market is really still just taking shape. And so it's hard to get, obviously I made a lot of calls and texts trying to get a sense of where things are at. And, so many teams that we could talk about don't even have a player represented. By the time we get to the deadline, maybe they're trading a few guys. I think of a team like St. Louis off the top of my head. I don't believe there's any Blues on there. But maybe as they get close to the deadline, if they're out of playoff position, they're selling some players. And so, yeah, it's a bit of a behemoth at the beginning. I think it came in around 3,000 and a little bit more words. So it was a lot of writing. But I'm excited. I actually thought it looked really cool. I'm not just saying this, that the graphic design team, that I'm not responsible for that at all. But I think that you start to see how the possibilities for something like that when it looks that way is like we can now just like move guys around really easily. Like I could see a world where we're like updating this thing in real time in the not too distant future, like where we're just like moving players in and out on almost like a daily basis or moving, certain people based on information up or down. And so it's the next evolution. I'm pumped to get. It feels good to start. You know what I mean? When you start somewhere and now it's like, okay, we know this isn't perfect. We're trying to reflect the information we have. There's a little bit of art and science to it, right? It's a little bit of a blend, I'd say. And we could probably talk about the first 4 players on the list, right? Because I've put together trade boards at my previous employer for a couple of years. So, I've been doing this for a couple of years. I don't think I've ever been part of one that it has 4 players all from the same team at the top of one.
Let's get to those 4 players.
Some people didn't like that, by the way.
Oh, really? Why not?
I caught a little heat on that. I don't know. Like, I'm like, first of all, tell me 4 players that you're with a high degree of certainty that are going to be moved by March 8th that are better than those players.
The 4 players, by the way, Noah Hannafin, number 1, Elias Lindholm, number 2, Chris Tanev, number 3, Nikita Zadorov, number 4. They all play for the Calgary Flames. Interesting.
That's like the 4 horsemen there of the Flames. But, I just think that the Flames have made the internal decision that they're going to trade those players. I think that they're already fielding calls on them. Like there's definitely interest already, when we're talking 3 months out until the deadline, and they're damn good players. Right. So I think that other good players will be moved in this next 3 months of trading activity in the NHL, but it's not entirely clear who those are at this point in time with certainty. And so I don't know. Again, it's not a perfect science, but I like the idea of clustering them together, because I think Calgary really, certainly in the early stages right now, kind of controls a little bit of the trade market, in the sense that if they decide, hey, we're looking to deal one or more of these players in the near future, I mean, we'll see trades sooner than later, because obviously you're looking at the potential of 4 trades there. Obviously, two players could go in one deal, but it's a lot of heavy lifting, and so how they manage that and navigate that, I think, will dictate kind of the rhythm of what happens here in terms of trading activity in the next few months.
A lot of people are linking an obvious trade partner in the Toronto Maple Leafs because of the history between Brad Treliving and Craig Conroy, the general managers of Toronto and Calgary, respectively. Brad Treliving obviously spending all that time in Calgary before he moves over to the Toronto Maple Leafs. They are also in need of a defenseman. Brad Treliving has also made that clear. So how likely is it that Toronto and Calgary could be trade partners?
I think there's a high degree of likelihood there that could happen. It's not to say it's 100%, because there are other defensemen around the league that the Leafs, I think, are looking at this time. I mean, it's been really unfortunate. I think the Leafs have had 5 different defensemen, miss time with injury this season, and they're at the 20 game mark. So, it was already potentially a position of need anyway, whether they were completely healthy. Brad Treliving is still a new general manager with this organization. Probably would have got to a thought process that he needed to make a deal anyway to address the blue line in some manner. But, when you're down Liljegren, it sounds like the clarity is coming on Klingberg, and probably won't be positive in terms of him playing again. And Mark Giordano goes out with an injury now. And so, it's a strain on that team. I don't think anyone envisaged, Simon Benoit and William Lagesson and Max Lajoie and all these players, playing, especially this early in the year, as much as they have for the Leafs. So, I think that you pair that with what Calgary has is some pretty good defensemen, all defensemen that Brad Treliving likes to a degree, because we know that he acquired them all when he was the Flames general manager. And so I think that to make that connection is not a leap of faith. This isn't the internet rumor that's people are trying to manifest into reality. I think that there is a lot of smoke there, and with this latest Giordano injury, you do wonder, is there an opportunity maybe to make that deal sooner rather than later? To get at least one of the defensemen out of Calgary, if not 2 of them.
Do you get the sense that Craig Conroy is in a rush to make a move? I don't get that sense at all, and maybe I'm basing that off of how he's handled the first few months on the job. I mean, he had the offseason where the trade market didn't manifest itself, and he really only moves Tyler Toffoli. And then at the end of the offseason, okay, you signed Michael Backlund, but it's been very slow in terms of how he's been able to get some moves done together. Not necessarily his fault. There's some other exterior factors there, but I do not get the sense that Craig Conroy is rushing to offload these assets. And I also still wonder if his team's performance also plays a role in how he handles those assets too.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, I'm just trying to imagine a chaos scenario. Like, what happened if Calgary reels off 10 straight wins right now?
Especially with the schedule that they have. I don't know if you've seen the schedule that they have leading up to Christmas, but they played Vegas earlier this week, which is, I mean, that's tough enough as it is. They get Dallas again for the third time in a month, essentially. Today, actually on Thursday. Tampa Bay is going to come up with that schedule. Did you say bet? What did you just say? What?
I learned a new word from you this week, so I'm just yeah, man, bet.
Bet? You did not know about the slang term bet? to this point.
Did I use it
Bet-
correctly? It doesn't mean like
I-
cool or
Bet's just like if well, it's really just like another way of saying like okay or like all right, like yeah, I'll do this or something. Like
so I was saying bet. Like, yeah, okay. They got the third time in a month for Vegas.
moving on. The Calgary Flames have a ton
Sorry,
of
you learned. Just so everyone knows, I didn't know what bet meant, and Julian keeps using it in the group chat, and I had to look it up on like Urban Dictionary kind of thing, or like the slang.
Come on.
And then I saw you tweet it yesterday afternoon. So,
Oh my God. Yes. We'll try to find a way to create a segment where I teach you some millennial. Aren't you a millennial too, technically?
I think by birth age. Are you Gen Z?
Yeah. No, I'm like at the end of millennial. Like I think 95, 96 babies are Gen Z. I'm at the other end of the spectrum of millennial.
Okay. Sorry.
Anyway, the point I was trying to
Who's getting traded? What's going on?
the point I was trying to make is between now and the last game before Christmas break. Here are some of the teams that Calgary still has to play. They get Dallas today. Vancouver comes up on the weekend. There's a stretch in December where they get Carolina, New Jersey, Colorado, Vegas again. Tampa Bay and Florida are also on that stretch, and Los Angeles is the last team they play before the Christmas break starts. There's some other teams in there like Minnesota and Anaheim and stuff, but like that's they're in the midst of a really tough stretch. So when you say like, what if they win 10 games in a row, especially if they do this like now, that would very much like, what do you do in that scenario? If they play really good against these really good teams, like, what do you do?
Well, I think a lot of it is dependent on do any of the players want to resign there? Is it the smart thing to resign them? I mean, maybe look, I know enough to know that I don't know exactly what the hell is going to happen. Do you know what I mean? So like, I would just say anything is possible. I still look at these names. We put 4 players from one team at the top of a trade board this week because we very much expect those players to be traded. But, you know, maybe the next trade board that it doesn't look that way if Calgary rips through this just like murderer schedule and they somehow, you know, propel themselves up. I mean, they've actually played better of recent time here than, you know, that was starting to affect the feeling of the trade board because, you know, it goes up on Wednesday, but it was, you know, I've been working on it for at least a week and a half anyway, and thinking about it even longer than that. But, you know, like where I actually, you know, had names on a screen and was moving things around and thinking about it. So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting spot. I still don't think it's likely to happen. And to your original question, you know, is Craig Conroy feeling like he has to do anything in the moment? I mean, why would he? He's got all the leverage here. He has the goods that other people want, right? So I think he's in a position to set high asking prices. And you know, you got to be smart when you do that. If you got to be realistic about what you think each player should be worth. But if teams step up and pay you a big price right now, then you make the trades. And if not, I don't, there's not that much harm in holding on to them. There's only, you know, the small amount of risk that, you know, someone could get injured and you potentially like lose the opportunity to trade an asset that way. But I mean, you know, this is a sport where injuries happen. I mean, that to some degree, that's a little bit unavoidable, or if it happens, you just say, well, you know, I don't think that's to be worried about this far out yet. But yeah, I think the Flames are in control of the marketplace. I think that they can sort of ride this out for a little while. And then if they're winning games, maybe we're talking about them, you know, trying to double down and sign someone again, right? I mean, they were this close to signing Noah Hannafin in October.
Yeah.
So, you know, that came within a whisker of already happening. Now it appears that Hannafin will be traded. You know, that's where I think it's going, but maybe something could change that gets them back to the negotiating table. This is the fun of sports.
What about some of the other teams on this board as well? Like I'm kind of curious about the Montreal Canadiens situation. You have Jake Allen and Sam Montembeault on this list, and I believe they also have Kane Primo up as well. What do you think is going to happen with them and the fact that they're carrying 3 goalies? Is this like a sustainable thing? Are they going to move on from one of these guys? What do you think about that situation?
Well, there's some parallels, I guess, with Detroit because they also have 3 goaltenders on their roster, and James Reimer is one listed lower down on the list. You know, I think with Montreal, they haven't decided which goalie they're going to trade. I think that's what's kind of interesting. Obviously, if you're carrying 3 goaltenders, it's pretty self-evident. They didn't want to put Kane Primo on waivers because they had reason to believe, or they had direct knowledge that at least one other team was going to claim him. And so they're protecting their asset. And here we are, almost 2 full months into the season, and they're still protecting their asset, but there's only two nets on the ice at any given time. I'm talking when you practice, and certainly when you play. Of course, you're only playing one guy at a time. So it's a tough spot to have 3 goalies for a prolonged period. And so I think ideally, or the Canadiens will trade one of their goaltenders. What's interesting is Montembeault is a pending UFA, and a little younger than Jake Allen. I think the Canadiens would like to keep him, but at what price is that possible? And so, he might end up being the easiest one to trade because his performance has been pretty good. He only makes $1 million this season, and it's a rental for whoever would be, making that deal. Jake Allen does have some limited no trade protection in his contract. He's a little older. He's signed through next season. So, teams maybe not as sold on trading for him. And so I think that's part of the dynamic that's going on. And of course, Primo's just the less proven of the 3 goaltenders in that team. He's played less. He is younger. And so, I don't know how it's going to unfold. Certainly the Canadiens have taken calls on their goalies, though. It's not a surprise. I mean, it's weird. There's a few teams that have too many goalies almost. And then a few places like Edmonton, where I think the Oilers are still really focused on trying to improve their goaltending. Things have obviously turned. They've had a nice week. Connor McDavid's jumped from like 90th to 10th in league scoring in a matter of days. Did like a Superman, just like blasted through half the league. But they still, their problems remain, right? And so, I'm not necessarily connecting Edmonton directly to Montreal, but teams that are looking for goalies know that Montreal is one of the ones to call. I think Detroit's another, and we'll have to see how the Red Wings do it. They have a similar dynamic. James Reimer's on an expiring deal. They've got Alex Lyon there, who's kind of taken the net of late, but did go 6 weeks at one point without a start. And then Ville Husso's their number 1. So it's one of these, like, it's goaltending is perplexing, right? If you don't have it, you pull your hair out, but some teams almost have too much of a good thing.
Yeah. You can check out the rest of the trade board at The Athletic, by the way. A lot of good names on there, a lot of good teams represented on that board. And I'm sure we will be bringing up a 2.0, a 3.0 as the rest of the season goes along, Siege. Well done, by the way.
Thanks, man. I mean, it's a fun project. It's stressful for some reason. I don't know why. Like, it's more stressful than a normal story, put it that way.
Yeah, I can imagine that.
Just because you want it to be right. I recognize it's people's lives. Like, you want it to be accurate, all that stuff. But I'm excited now that it's up. As I say, I think having something to work off makes this future versions easier, because you get really focused on, who the players are that are in play. And it, by the time we get to the end of February and we're a week out from the deadline, it's going to be pretty evident who the main players are going to be as we get to trade deadline.
Trade deadline. Can't wait for March, buddy. Let's go to Detroit.
God.
Oh, let's go to Detroit real quick, because I know we only have so much time. Patrick Kane signing with the Red Wings. I believe you got that first.
I did. I believe, anyway.
You did get that first. Like, you might have beaten out like Frege by like a couple seconds.
Well, anyway, yeah. I mean, it's interesting choice. We've been on this one for a while. If
you also predicted you'd go to Detroit too. I asked you for a prediction, and you said Detroit, so you also got that right.
That was my sense. Obviously, that was an educated guess, we'll call it. Still a bit of a guess at the end, though, because obviously there were teams that had discussions with Kane right towards the end. It sounds like it was a pretty exhaustive process. In the final analysis, I think that there was maybe 8 teams that did at least a Zoom call with Kane, and we're not talking a quick like, "Hello, I'm Patrick, I'm GMX." Like, it's going through where he would fit on their roster, where those GMs or coaches see him fitting in the lineup, where their team is at, what they might plan to do as the season goes along. Like, we're talking 45-minute, hour-long calls, and then there's obviously a debrief. And so I think there was a lot of information taking from Patrick Kane, probably an extra week longer than everyone thought it would be before he made his decision. But, Detroit fit for a lot of reasons. We've mentioned Alex DeBrincat a lot. I think he also had a really strong rapport from what I can tell with Derek Lalonde, their coach, and really, liked what he heard from him. The Red Wings also had the most cap space among the teams that were most heavily involved here. And I'm not saying that money won the day, but it was a factor. I think that A, they could sign him to a pretty good deal, and B, they have money left over now to make future upgrades to their team still. I mean, they didn't commit all their remaining cap space to Kane, whereas some of the contending teams might have only paid him a fraction of what he got in Detroit and had no money left over for other moves. So, I think it fit on that level. He played, some people probably don't know this that have been around, but he played as a teenager in Michigan as well for the Honey Baked program. 1 year, had just ridiculous stats. If you want to imagine a young, 14-year-old Patrick Kane ripping up at 80 goals or something. And then a couple years at the U.S. development program. And so I think he's comfortable in the city. As he said in his press conference, I love the quote, it's called Hockey Town for a reason. I think he's a hockey nut, is Patrick Kane. And I think it fits. And, what'll be interesting is, there is some understanding here if the Red Wings say fall out of a playoff spot. Patrick Kane got a no trade clause as part of this, but there is a world where if this doesn't work for whatever reason, I don't necessarily mean between him and the team, but if the Red Wings fall off, maybe we're talking about Patrick Kane joining the trade board and being a player moved before March 8th. I mean, he'll have a say in that, but I think it's been contemplated. I mean, look, this guy's coming back because he wants to play for a team that has a chance to win. He hopes it's in Detroit, and we'll just have to see how it goes.
Yeah, we'll have to see how that goes with one Patrick Kane. But he at least signed with the team. Felt like we were trying to figure out where he was going to go for months.
You should have just been listening to the CJ show. I was telling you Eastern Conference. I think we did. I wrote a story at The Athletic. I'm sure we talked about it on the show. I had the 5 teams I thought had any shot. They were all the ones that were in it sort of right to the end. So humble brag, but I'm just saying.
I love it when CJ puts the chest out. Be like, I told you.
Well, I'm just saying, we're not just here to goof around about bet. We also drop a little knowledge between our goofiness.
Yes, of course.
But you got to listen closely because it's not constant. It's only here and there we'll drop the odd nugget that gives you something,
High level knowledge darts from one Chris Johnston. Before we wrap up, stick taps. Do you have a stick tap?
I think you go first.
I can do that. For everyone who has Spotify and has been taking part in the Wrapped feature on the app, and they've been posting the podcast that they listen to, and there have been a lot of people, at least in my mentions anyway, who have been tagging the CJ show and saying that they listen to our podcast. Thank you. Stick taps to everyone who has listened to the CJ show throughout this past year. We really appreciate you.
And some of you listen for hundreds and hundreds of
thousands of minutes.
Yes.
It's incredible.
It's wild. I'll stick tap. I had someone drop in my DMs and mention that we have a group of people in Thailand that are devoted listeners of the show.
Thailand?
I don't have the whole story. I don't know if they're expats that live there. Probably reasonable to assume they might be North Americans that have moved there, perhaps, or working there. But yeah, apparently we got a group of listeners in Thailand. So
okay,
if you're giving it to all the Wrapped people, I'm like, it's only fitting I stick tap someone out there all the way in Thailand listening to our show. Just again, it blows my mind. I because you record it, but you never really think about who's listening. Like when you're recording, you don't think of that, right? I only know that my dad listens to every episode. Beyond that, I don't know who else is listening. But
it's always an adventure to figure that out. That's really fun. That's awesome. Thank you so much to everyone listening to whatever corner of the world you live in. It's always it's an honor to be a part of your podcast set list. So thank you. I appreciate it. CJ appreciates it too. And we all do at the SDPN. And that goes for everyone who put up any show on the SDPN on their Wrapped or listens to it in any of the corners of the world, whether it's the Steve Dangle podcast, whether it's Agent Provocateur, Noxine Cax, Tim and Rainey show, our basketball show, all the programs that we got going on at the SDPN. We appreciate your support from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you so much. And that's going to do it for the Thursday edition of the CJ show. We'll be back on Monday. We'll have Ask CJ. And if there's other fun stuff that comes up on the show, we will be silly and goofy about it. And of course, provide, actual news and notes. For CJ, I'm Julian. So long and peace. Enjoy your weekend. Bet.
The Chris Johnston Show.
Powered by Sports Interaction, your homegrown sportsbook. Always remember to bet local.
Inside the game twice a week. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris. And follow Julian McKenzie @JK McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.